Hi, everyone. I'd like to start this installment of the PrimateCast with a sad announcement. Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago has just announced the passing on April 20th of Dr. Steve Ross, who was the director of the Lester E. Fisher Center for the Study and Conservation of Apes. Steve was a friend and colleague, and someone I admire greatly, not only for his tireless efforts to protect chimpanzees in captivity and in the wild, and bring awareness to issues surrounding the importance of practicing animal welfare, but also for his generous and supportive nature, which was really clear from the moment I met him. We had Steve on the PrimateCast twice, first on May 19th, 2013, during a visit to Japan, and again on October 4th, 2016, at the International Primatological Society Conference, which he himself hosted through Lincoln Park Zoo. It was an honor and a pleasure to have had those moments, among others, with him. For anyone interested, please check out those two interviews for a glimpse into his work and the legacy he'll leave behind. But Steve's passing is a huge loss for primatology, for animal welfare and advocacy, and, of course, for all that knew him. So my heart truly and deeply goes out to his family. I'm incredibly sorry for your loss. Now, on this installment of the PrimateCast, Dr. Ikuma Adachi.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior,
primatology,
typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Okay, well then, welcome to the PrimateCast number 65, being released on Friday, April the 22nd, 2022. Before getting into today's interview with Dr. Ikuma Adachi, I have another unfortunate announcement from Kyoto University. Many of you may know already that the Primate Research Institute was recently restructured and no longer exists in its previous form or name. Now, the major research center in its place is called the Center for the Evolutionary Origins of Human Behavior, also known as eHub. eHub is made up of three major departments, like the cognitive neuroscience, systems neuroscience, and genome science. And it retains its original two other centers, known as the Center for Human Evolution Modeling Research, which manages the animals at our facility, and the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology, or CICASP, which is who continues to bring you the PrimateCast. But that also means that the Department of Ecology and Social Behavior and the Department of Evolution and Phylogeny have been relocated. Many of us from the Ecology and Behavior group, including myself, are now members of Kyoto University's Wildlife Research Center, with others at the Center for Ecological Research. Members of the Evolution and Phylogeny group have moved to the Kyoto University Museum. However, for the most part, we remain in Inuyama and collectively refer to this facility as a whole as Kyoto University's Inuyama campus. The Primate Research Institute was an historical institution with a rich 55-year history. Founded in 1967, it emerged as a world-leading institution for research into primatology and evolutionary anthropology, cognitive science and neuroscience, and primatological and anthropological genetics and genomics. I myself arrived on the scene as a fresh doctoral candidate in 2007, and I feel pretty privileged to have been part of this rich history for the past 15 years. We and I hope that we can continue to add to the legacy of PRI and uphold the standards in research and scholarship of those who came before us within our new structure. With that, though, I'd like to get into our interview with Dr. Ikuma Adachi. So he's associate professor at what's now known as eHub, or the Center for the Evolutionary Origins of Human Behavior. And in this interview, we've had Ikuma, by the way, a few times before on the PrimateCast. In this particular interview, we start by talking about internationalization at Kyoto University. Ikuma is now, in addition to being associate professor in cognitive neuroscience, he's also the head of CICASP. So we talk about internationalization and the efforts that we've been part of, and Kyoto University as a whole has been part of. And then we get more into what it's like to run a chimpanzee research lab. In the context of that, we fall into Ikuma's work in comparative cognition, where we talk about things like perception and the world we create with our brains. We get into his work on cross-modal processing of information through different sensory inputs. And so, for example, touch on why do we associate the color white with things that are high in pitch, for example. He also introduces the idea of metaphorical mapping So how not only humans, but also chimpanzees seem to map concepts into space, like how we typically arrange things like numbers from left to right, and think of relationships in a social hierarchy from top to bottom. So you can think of individuals at high ranks or in top positions in a company, for example, are usually represented in space, like either through a diagram or chart or something like that, or even in your own mind in a top-down manner as well. So we touched on this as well with Ikuma way back in March 2019 on the PrimateCast number 20, which we did from the annual Congress of the Japan Society for Animal Psychology. So for anyone interested, you can check that out as well. I also wanted to dig into areas where Ikuma's work runs into bigger picture questions like the idea of human uniqueness and how our ideas about that specific topic are constantly being challenged with the more we research and understand other minds. We close out the interview with the importance of chimpanzees and cognitive studies with them here and other places, and some efforts by Ikuma to promote such work and an understanding of the mind and the natural world to the public. So after a rather long preamble to the PrimateCast number 65, here's my interview with Dr. Ikuma Adachi. So Ikuma, welcome back to the PrimateCast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be back here.
No kidding. So I think it was 10 years ago, maybe our second podcast that we released in 2012 with the members of the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology.
Right. With David
Hill,
and Fred
Berkovich, and Chris Martin, who was one of the founders of the podcast.
That's true.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot's happened since then, for sure.
Too much, I guess.
We might get back in. Yeah, we'll get into that a bit later on.
Sure.
But over that time as well, you were working in PsyCast for a lot of those years, but then stepped away for a time too, and now you're back as the head of this of the center or the director of PsyCast. How are you feeling about being back?
It's, I don't know, I'm very happy. But meanwhile, I feel like, like a big gap definitely exists. I guess 4 or 5 years I haven't touched anything about the PsyCast. Although as a future planning committee, I know that what is going on in the PsyCast, and always very happy to see the progress there. But I feel like something far from me all the time. But now I finally come back to the PsyCast, and I'm very happy to see progress directly from my eyes, and also happy to plan for future, because all internationalization moving forward in everywhere in Japan, but doesn't have to always go to the proper direction.
Yeah,
we see many struggle, but here you guys always working very well to just always supporting the students and international scholars, and we are kind of milestone for the Kyoto University. Kyoto University, some other department even ask us how you want to handle these issues. So I'm very proud of that, and we want to be on those edge always to just promoting the internationalization in the Kyoto University. So I'm very happy to be part of it.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of initiatives by us, but also by the university to foster more international collaboration and bringing in a lot of faculty with English teaching capacity to increase their curriculum, English language education curriculum. But more broadly, if you think of your time coming through, when did you first arrive at Kyoto University?
As a student?
As a student, yeah.
It's 1997 as an undergraduate. Is that right? I guess so.
That sounds about right, yeah. Our timelines kind of overlap a little
old
bit.
History, right?
But so how much have you seen the university kind of change in that perspective towards internationalization?
Well, from the beginning, Kyoto University always tried to be open to the internationals, and they want to welcome many international students as well. But the system-wise, they are not really ready for that. So only those students who have practiced in Japanese a lot, or the mixed supported students, can come to the Kyoto University. And the faculty side or education side is more problematic, and administration issues as well. So all students need to get like a lot of support from their lab members and also their friend in Japan to go through those issues. And that shouldn't be easy, but good things, of course, they are all motivated. That's why they apply to Japanese university or Kyoto University, and so they managed it. But like still, I see many struggle there. And now I guess educational side, at least they have many English course taught. I mean, and many courses taught in English, and they have, I mean, plenty, or at least reasonable number of international faculties that they can access to. So I feel it's more open, even more open than before. Although still, like for faculties and those all systems as a package, it can be improved though.
Yeah. Yeah, and then specifically for our institution here, and maybe we can get to just the elephant in the room, which is that we are no longer calling it the Primate Research Institute, but the Evolutionary Center for the Origins of Human Behavior. But even when it was the PRI, we've probably always, but certainly in the last decade or two decades, had quite a big group of international students, postdocs, researchers, visiting professors, and faculty as well. And that's also true for your lab, which is mainly the Chimpanzee Cognition and Comparative Cognitive Lab. So in that sense, how have you kind of seen the evolution of your research group in the context, of internationalization, but also just how that fits into the scheme of your research?
That's interesting. It's slightly different from like a general perception toward the Kyoto University internationalization, because the chimpanzee lab itself is quite unique in the world actually. So we have a couple more people, couple more places that you can work on the chimpanzees cognitions, but here is one of those most known place for the chimpanzee cognition. That's why it's already attract many internationals from the almost early stage of the lab, and that's why we have so many international students try to come to the PRI, or the chimpanzee lab, like Matsuzawa, Professor Matsuzawa's initiative to get more internationalization of the institute itself, which is actually the good things, because he has eyes for like internationalization from the beginning, because lab is already attract so many internationals. He want to have a system to support them, and that's expand to the whole PRI. So the dynamics there wasn't bad things at all, I guess.
So keeping the the international part of it aside, I'm kind of curious about just how you see chimpanzee labs in general being run, or how what are the main differences that you, because you've also seen other cognitive labs abroad in the US maybe, and also in Europe. So what are the kind of major differences in the style of management and the kinds of things done here in Japan at the former PRI and what you see elsewhere?
Good question. The biggest probably difference is the division of labor, the way of division of labor, especially when it comes to the animal lab. Always you have to have those staffs for taking care of the animals, and the researchers is kind of separate from that. And in the Western culture, Western university, I guess, including states, they have a clear division, and they have an enrichment team, they have those keepers team, and we have a researcher side. Of course, we're gonna communicate together to make it better as a package, but still we see who is in charge is quite deviated or differentiated in the area, in the university. Here we also have a human evolution modeling center, which is taking care of all primates. But all researchers' involvement in the keeping and the enrichment is quite playing a big role, I guess, because human evolution modeling center provide the basic for the keeping management of the animals, which is very nice. In that sense, it's very similar to the Western countries and much better than many other Japanese institute, I guess, because I'm not 100% sure for the other part of the Japanese institute, but I heard that researchers even more heavily involved in those activities. But here, the modeling center basically in charge of management, so responsibility wise it's more clearly split, but yet they provide basics. But if you want to give them enriched environment, then researchers should really pay for that, and they need to get their own research grant to cover it. Because for us, we work on the cognitive abilities in the chimpanzees, and to think about cognitive abilities that cannot be expressed in the very poor condition, or that cannot be developed under the very poor condition. So they have to be in a good condition, and preferably should be close to natural wild setup as much as possible. Of course, it's captivity. There's a limitation, but at least need to be toward that direction to get their natural response to the environment and stimuli. So we put a lot of effort to do that, and that's something we researchers have to do it by ourselves in this place, which is, I mean, understandable, which is okay. But like if we talk about difference, probably who is in charge of thinking about that is different. Yeah. So here it's like the lab need to think about, I mean, management part and the enrichment and research part. That's kind of like more inclusive in that sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it ties into too how the lab was formed, with the kind of participant observation aspect to it, where a lot of the former researchers would spend a lot more time with the animals that you might not see in other places. Yeah. So kind of related to that, this kind of a two-part question, and then I want to get into your research specifically, and your group's research. But when you have this, rather coldly, we can call it a resource, but when you have these amazing animals like the chimpanzees as your subjects of study, but there's obviously a limited number of them, and there's a limited amount of space that you have access to, and at some points your lab was actually quite huge. So, and this ties into the management thing, but the first question is, how do you manage what people are doing in terms of their research, and kind of split the, or like manage how active the chimpanzees need to be in their studies? I know these chimps love to do the experiments, so that's not like you have to, well, I mean, more or less.
Yeah. For the motivation part of the chimpanzees, we don't have to be worried.
Right.
At least we haven't had worried anything for a long time.
Right.
Because they're getting old a bit, so possibly from now on we need to worry about that to some extent. But for the management of the research topic of each researchers here in the lab, we actually don't do so much control, because we try to encourage people to develop their own research questions, and as a lab we help them to develop it. We help them to how can I say, the preparing the environment for the research questions or the technology for the questions. But the question itself should be from their own motivation. That's what we think. Because for the researchers, without the interest or motivation, self-motivation, it's very difficult to proceed. Because majority of the work is very, how can I say, like it's not really super exciting, you know, the work that you have to do, because always daily basis you go down to the lab and then training animals for like several months to get the data and then writing paper. So many of those works should be possible only when you are very motivated to proceed the research. So to how can I say, encourage people or students to keep their own motivation, we always encourage them to develop their own research questions. So generally we haven't asked them to do whatever like we want to do.
Sure.
Of course, they are joining our classes. Means their interest can be affected by our own interest.
Of course.
And in a seminar or in a journal reading club, always we discuss. So that can be, you know, a stimulus for them. But we don't specifically direct them to any direction.
Yeah, I feel like in Kyoto University, this is definitely the case. But there's that philosophy where all of the incoming students are supposed to find their own way. I have heard people, you know, within the ecology and behavior group, you almost send a new master student into the forest and say, okay, watch some animals and then think of something interesting that you're interested in.
Don't come back until you find something interesting. That's a classical story.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't need to be so threatening, but just the idea where you know, put somebody out in the context and without having that experience, a lot of the faculty here feel like it's impossible to come up with any kind of an idea. But I wondered if it was similar in the chimpanzee lab, because you have if you just imagine sending someone out into a forest, it's much less constrained,
of course,
than anyone coming here to work in a small
True.
space,
True.
with multiple people. And so I was kind of curious about that process.
Yeah, so I guess for that sense, I mean, journal reading club or seminar, and then listening about the other students' research topic or from the faculty, that would be definitely the seed for them to think about what can be the interesting topic. And then we don't really ask them to really think about the absolute experiment plans. Simply what kind of topic can be interesting for you, for them. And if they hit on like some broad idea, so here is the area of the interest that I probably want to proceed. Then we can do some literature search together, or I mean not me reading all literature by myself, but asking them to find some research or papers related to it, and then slightly dig into the topic and then specify which in the area can be more interesting for them. And practical side for like experiment paradigm and the technology, and those are always we can help them to develop it. We all have those like techniques basically in the lab, so that can be shared quite easily. But most difficult part is finding the research interest in a broad sense. Doesn't have to be like a one specific idea, but like which area of research can be very interesting for them.
Okay. So we'll come back to like mentorship and education a bit later, but I think now's a good time to get into what you do. So maybe following up on what you just said, how did you come to your own research topic? And did it happen early, or what was the process there?
Well, I don't know like in which level you want to get sorry, but like
you can start wherever you like.
Yeah, the very first moment that I get interested into those animal cognition is when I was in high school students. Second year of the high school, I need to find which university I want to go, because my high school was quite oriented to the university. I don't know how to say that, like promoting people to just get into the good university. So they have a good system to supporting students to find their interest to proceed to the university. So in the second year, beginning of the second year, they got like all interview for the students. So what you want to do in the university? They don't care about like a name or level of the university, but simply what do you want to do in the university? It's kind of rare, because many, on the time at least, many high school in Japan kind of compete each other, like which high school can send more students to the good university.
Yeah.
And for that sense, I really, I was happy that, I was in that environment, even though that high school is ranked very high. Even this year it's ranked on 12th or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It's quite nice. But like they don't force us to go to the good university. They only care about what we want to learn there. And there I start to think about what I want to do. Initially, actually, I thought I want to be a vet. And I look up what is a requirement. And the half, I'm not really good at in the math. But the vet require the math. But I'm good at math for the, how can I say, the people who is taking like humanity course side.
Okay.
And that's one part of the reason. But more what I found on the time is to be a vet, you need to kill many animals to learn about their mechanism.
Right.
I do understand that's very important procedure. And yes, by killing them by how do you that? Kaibo.
Yeah, doing the necropsy.
And necropsy, so you can learn their body mechanisms and so on and so forth. That's quite important. But to me, I want to be a vet to save the animals. And to be that, you have to kill so many animals to learn about them. And when I was young, I couldn't just take it. Now, if I have a chance to think about it again, maybe I still want to go to the vet, but on the time, it's very difficult for me to handle that. How can I say the conflict in interest and also what you have to do. And then I looking up the whole list of the university and those, not the whole, but I mean list of the university and their department information. And I found out the newly launched up the lab in Kyoto University, which is Comparative Cognition Lab, and it says we can make the scientific approach to the animal mind. It was interesting to me because for me, it's psychology and mind is something it's very difficult for us to scientifically approach.
Yeah.
But especially for the animal side, because they don't speak, they don't, so it's very interest me and catch my interest. And I looked at more, and I actually download a couple papers from the PI there, whose name is Kazuo Fujita, and just I was fascinated by the methodology, and it's simple behavioral test experiment, actually, but like just how to make a story out of those data.
Yeah.
And after that, I just get more interest into the animal psychology area, and that's how I get into the Kyoto University, and also specifically the faculty of letters. And I actually worked with Professor Kazuo Fujita there and got PhD there. So that's the first point why I get into the field. And topic, my research interest itself is quite broad. I mean, main one is like a language evolution.
Yeah.
Because when you think about like a human uniqueness, I mean, people can easily hit on language, one of the biggest difference from the other animals possibly. But to me, I have had so many pets in my house for a long time, and I always wondering what they are thinking and what is a way of their communication. And I know that there is a communication skill to them, and they have many signals that they can express. And but getting to more into what is the substantial difference from the language communication to their own way of the communication, and how it can be even developed or evolved. And that's why the language is one big question to me. And another one is social skill, because again, it's connected to language, but with the language we are expanding the size of the social groups, and also structure getting more complex. But without a language, how they can manage their social life. So those two are connected, but two main research questions to me. So it's like partly because I give up the bet and then want to get into the more scientific approach to the mind. And among the mind, what really attract my interest is communication in a broad sense, but one, it's fall into the language evolution.
Yeah.
The other is more like a non-language communication.
Yeah. I think a big part of that too is the perception and perceptual abilities of animals. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning with I guess a professor emeritus at the University of California, Irvine, Donald Hoffman. I don't know if okay. Yeah, so he was talking about consciousness and human perception, and made the interesting point that I guess through a bunch of simulations that he and colleagues and students have done, the probability that what we perceive as the truth or as reality is basically zero, which and the reason for that is it evolved by natural selection. So there's a very specific reason why we perceive the things we do, because they help us survive and reproduce. And I thought it was
it's quite interesting, right?
It is quite interesting, and I think for people who study biology and evolution and certainly cognition, it definitely fits with what we're thinking.
Yeah,
but
exactly. I mean, in my class, always I say like we just perceive the created world.
Yeah.
So there is nothing that exactly same as what you perceive. We just extract couple information out of the environment, and we create the world in our brain. Yeah. And we feel that's a world. Yeah. But if you extract different information, that can be completely different. Yeah. So, I mean, even within human, there is a difference. But if it across the species, it can be more different, depending on natural selection, as you said. Yeah. So, perception is playing a lot of, important roles, I guess. Yeah. And so I guess some of your research interfaces with that, like how, maybe related to how animals pick up signals and get information about the environment and their social worlds and things. But so one of the topics that you study quite a lot is cross-modal representation. So can you maybe just introduce what that means and well, cross-modal means cross-sensory modality information processing. So initially what I did is kind of connected from the concept, because again, language is one of the big functional language is categorization, categorizing item and then treat those items equally within the same category. And we also put a label on it so that we can simplify the information to just better hold in your memory. And why I started getting interested into the concept is it's very difficult to prove that animals have the concept similar to humans, because of the most of the studies previously done on the time is they use bunch of similar stimuli and then prove that they can group those stimuli. For example, like they presented many pictures of pigeons and other animals and then train them to differentiate those two categories, and they can do it based on whatever cue they use. And of course, there's many studies try to focus on what is actually the cue that they focus on, which is nice. I mean, which is very good way to access to their perceptual grouping. But perceptual similarity is not the important things for human category. I mean, it's important, but it's not only one cue that we use. Even more, we have functional category, for example, like a tool, food, which share the same function but not looking similar to each other.
Right.
But you can still group it. And there is some stream of this animal study also working on this functional categorization as well. But I think cross-modal concept would be another way that you can directly tackle on this topic, because voice and face, for example, of the same species cannot be look similar to each other because it's totally different modality information. But if they group it automatically or spontaneously, that can be good evidence that they integrate information into a category. So that's the starting point for me to get interested in cross-modal information processing. And recently, I work on a little bit different way for the cross-modal processing, which I call cross-modal correspondences. And that is not really the category, but it's more connected to like tuning of the perception or natural selection that you mentioned. But for human case, let's say some information in one modality can bring the automatic some secondary experience for another modality. Let's say when you hear the higher pitch sound and you are facing two different color in front of you, one is black, one is white, and then you are asked, let's say, which one is which do you think fit better to the sound? And then majority of the people, I don't want to say 100%, but majority of people saying, if I have to force, or if I'm forced to choose one of them, higher pitch sound should go with white better. And there is no reason to do that. But somehow we are sorting auditory information and then visual information separately, but some shared aspect there connect those two modalities.
Right.
And people start to think about why this happens. And one idea is language can be, the one source of it. Because when you have to label the name of the items, if you are biased to use a certain sound, depending on the appearance, then it can narrow down the candidate sound. And also, if you use that sound which fit to this correspondence, then other member in the group can potentially accept it better. It sounds like it. You can probably feel it, right? If it's far off from your feeling, then I don't think that's the way to go. So, language, when it comes to the vocal signal to be a kind of representation of the specific item, need to be accepted within the group. That's why it can be used in the communication. So through these requirements, this bias can play a big role. And the many linguists actually thinks it's co-evolved, evolved together.
Right.
So as we use it more, we start to develop more bias. And that might be the case, but we don't know. That's why we wanted to know that whether or not non-language animals or animals who doesn't equip any language also have similar correspondence. If that is the case, correspondence comes first, and then language try to employ it. And then we can get the order in evolution of the orders, which comes first, or it's co-evolved. So that's a recent topic for me in relation to the language evolution and cross-modal processing.
So I feel like I've read or I've heard that and with languages around the world, there seem to be some associations with the sound. Maybe the pitch matters, but like the sound or sharpness or roundness of a sound fits the object that it's trying to describe quite well, right?
Right. The famous example is Maruma and Takete.
Yes.
Or Buba and Kiki.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yes, with those sounds with a round shape or more pointy shape, you feel like one sound fit better than the other.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's also another things. The simpler version is pitch and the color. That might be more simpler aspect, but we have more complicated connections as well. And we already have found that some correspondence exists in non-human animals as well. But I don't want to say that's why cross-modal correspondence comes first and the language always apply the existing one. Mm-hmm. But I think there's two steps. Already there is some connection and then language applied. But as we apply those connection in a language system, they can develop the secondary or thirdary connection.
Right.
So like those pointy and more complicated sound could be just some product after we start to use it, maybe.
Right. I'm kind of curious. So now, well, it's been decades that language communication abilities have been studied in non-human species, and we've learned a whole lot about how those work. And there's been a lot of auditory analyses about the different structures of sounds and things that are being produced, and maybe even gestures. Is there any evidence that something like that exists in non-language using but highly sophisticated communication systems outside of humans?
Well, the intensity, for example, that can be easily shared across the different modalities. And when it comes to the gesture, for example, if you make a big gesture to direct certain orientation, that also encoding distance, for example. So like if the distance is far, you make a big gesture. And those intensity of the behavior and the actual physical information seemingly connected in chimpanzees and other apes as well. And other than that, I don't know for the behavior work. I mean, my study also touch on those correspondence space and order, for example. In human case, like initial item in the order, somehow you place it on a space on the left in the space, or top to bottom or something like that. So you have like certain way of usage of spatial information to coding the order information, and similar things happen in the chimpanzees as well. So that exists, and that's quite actually interesting study, because human also think reading culture, the direction of the reading and writing potentially bias us from left to right. But a non-language animal, again the chimpanzee, show the same left to right bias. That means probably default can be from left to right, and the writing direction can tune it. If you really train to write from right to left, your attention direction can be switched, but the default wise probably left to right. So those things are happening, but it's still scattering. Evidence not really scattering and not completely into a package to talk about the whole story of the evolution.
How do you test something like that in the lab with chimpanzees? For example, this spatial ordering that that they have.
Well, we have very not famous, but like a famous task for the chimpanzees with numbering task. So we just presented multiple numbers on the screen from 1 to 9. Sometimes it's all adjacent, sometimes non-adjacent numbers are used. And they already learn to touch from 1 or smaller to the bigger number. And in the training, we always place them in a random order, or random location. Means location cannot be a cue for them for which item should be answered first or touched first. And with those chimpanzees, we simply presented 2 numerals once a while. So within those numbering tasks, it's a test trial, sparsed into the baseline trials. And then in a test trial, only 2 numerals presented, 1 and 9, or sometimes 1 and 5 or 5 and 9. And then always located left to right or right to left. Means 1 on the left or 1 on the right. So we have 2 conditions, like match to the left to right orientation or right to left. And all the subject, no matter what handedness they have, they show left to right is easier, means solved quicker.
Yeah.
And handedness doesn't affect, means it's not simply the kinematic motion or easiness of the kinematic motion from left to right or right to left doesn't matter. Where it's presented actually affect, even though they have been trained in a context that the location cannot be a cue at all for the task. So it's almost spontaneous or automatic that whenever you process order, you somehow try to locate from the left to right. So even they cannot avoid it. That sounds like quite strong evidence for me to just say space and order are connected to each other.
Yeah, and even in a social context. So you have another study that I quite like, and I like when you present it. But the idea of how dominance hierarchies are also mapped spatially. So this is all part of your metaphorical mapping research. But can you explain that?
Sure.
Those study as well.
Well, in human language, in many cultures, many languages, the rank, social rank can be indicated by this high or low, which is originally for the spatial information. And high rank individual means definitely, the stronger in whatever context, maybe physical, maybe in a social, doesn't matter, but the rank wise it's better rank. And I get interested in space and the order can be connected to each other, and that might be reflected in the language in the same way. So I tested chimpanzee whether or not they place the higher rank individual in a space, or they might not see any correspondence. That's a question actually. And there I haven't trained them to focus on the rank at all. So in a training, what I did is just make them identify the individual. So I use a familiar picture or the picture of the familiar individual to the subject, and they have to match the identity of the picture. So first they saw one picture on a screen, like let's say individual A, and then after it's gone, you have two choices, either the same individual or different individual. And if they can make a proper attachments, if they can choose the same identity or individual from what they saw before, they can get reinforcement. So they only pay attention to the identity, not the rank. But in a test trial, what I did is just those two choices located vertically, and in half of the time, it's actually 1/4. But there's 4 conditions, but main question is high rank individual located in a high space and low rank individual located in low in a space. So that's kind of corresponding condition. And the another one is, of course, it's flipped. Low rank individual now placed on the high in a space, and the high rank individual located on the low. So if they feel this is a bit weird or unnatural, then it will be more difficult for them. So I want to see is there any difference between those two different arrangement of the choices, and it does. It did.
Yeah.
So whenever they see the high rank individual located in the bottom of the screen, they have slower in latency, means they take more time to solve the task. And the task is very simple, identity matching. So the performance rate, the correct rate is almost same across the conditions, but arrangement is like misarranged, then they have more time that they need. So it's kind of hesitation, or they try to touch on the top and then stop it and then move into the bottom or something like that happening. So again, we haven't tried. We haven't trained them to pay attention to the rank, but whenever they see their familiar individual, seemingly they extract those information, and then that's connected to space, and that affect their own performance. And I guess it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear example of some cognitive dissonance that the animals must be feeling when.
True.
And I like how when you present that, you usually use a picture of your old boss.
Oh yeah. That's easy to catch.
Nobody can ever imagine it being below the rest of the people in the hierarchy.
That's always happening for the structure chart, for example, of the company, or always put the higher rank or the bigger things on the top, and so that's implemented in the language quite well, or our system quite well, and seemingly that exists in the chimpanzees. But for that, we cannot 100% exclude the possibility of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the space usage wise, of course, high rank individual doesn't have to be always in a high in a space, but whenever they face to each other in a natural communication between those dominant and subordinate individuals, dominant one is covering the subordinate body or like a going over.
I see.
So there is some connected spatial information for the rank in a daily life.
Yeah.
It's not the case for the where they stay, but there's potentially some connection.
Yeah.
That's why actually I moved to the number task, which we can control the experience, and we can make the situation that location cannot be a cue
Yeah.
for the task at all.
Yeah.
So that's connected actually.
Okay. Well, so here's kind of an open-ended question, though, maybe from your own personal experience working here for more than a decade. But obviously, out of this lab and out of many other chimpanzee cognition labs, we're constantly challenged with being faced with the things that we thought were quote-unquote uniquely human. It turns out that there's some aspects of that in other species as well. And we know that scientifically. But as somebody who spends a lot of time with the animals, has there been anything over that time that you've been really surprised about in terms of what cognitive abilities they have, or maybe emotional capacity,
Right.
or anything like that?
That's a very important question and good point actually. And initial stage of the chimpanzee studies, I guess, like people are more eager to find what is shared with human.
Mm-hmm.
And we have accumulated so many studies just showing the similarity between human and chimpanzees, and which is a very important contribution to the scientific understanding of human evolution. But meanwhile, the more we see those similarities, the more I eager to see the differences. Because with those similar structure of the body or structure of the brain, size is different, but also group complexity among the primate chimpanzee has a relatively complex social society or social system. So yes, similarity is interesting, but now more to the different part. And interesting things to me, and it's still not new but still surprising why this is so different, is like many non-human animals, including also chimpanzees, are very bad at how can I say, the I don't know what is a good term for that, like it's kind of connected to conceptualization issues, but we cannot really treat multiple items in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So human, again, we put a label for the category and then we treat it as if it is an actual object.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I talk about apple, you can quite easily you can imagine apple in your perception or in your mind as well. But the chimpanzees, we can't train them to label it. Like let's say we just prepare 3-4 different symbols and train them to use or assign those symbols to the group of pictures. Whatever apple they say, they have to touch the symbol which is assigned to the apple. They can learn it, but it's so difficult for them. And even after they learn it, they even treat this symbol, they cannot treat this symbol as a similar information as apple. So for human case, for example, if you learn apple, the term apple means actual apple, then you can do both direction. Means after you see the apple, you can say this is the apple. But also whenever you hear the sound apple, you can immediately reflect thinking about apple. So the term you can assign, but also whenever you perceive it, you can get the actual information out of it, and then you can think about apple. But for chimpanzees and many other species, or I have to say even in chimpanzees, after we train it, what they learn is if you see apples, you have to pick this symbol. So A then B. It's not A equal B.
Right.
And that's a quite striking difference. And originally this difficulty found like 2-3 decades ago, so it's not new at all. But the more we see the similarity and the advanced cognitive abilities in the chimpanzees among the primate lineage or mammal lineage, you know, the more it's surprising how it's so difficult for them to equally treat those information. And for them, the level of the representation or symbolization would be much more restricted than the humans. And the language definitely facilitated it. But we kind of expected to see some seed of the similarity in those species as well. But never be like a equal B. And all training is basically a chain of the understanding. If you see certain information, then you have to do this way. So it cannot be just automatically flipped. That's a quite shocking and striking difference, and I still think it's so interesting.
I mean, it is true that we get focused so much on how amazing the abilities of some other species are relative to our own, but then sometimes you get stuck on these things that for us seem second nature.
Exactly.
So how do you think that what do you think that tells us about the current way we think about even just the field of comparative cognition, or what are like maybe the way the brain works differently across different species? What do we kind of take out of that information?
Well, I guess, I mean, that's not only from this specific one issue of the symbolization, but like again, to some extent comes to the language, but not the function of the communication itself, but level of the symbolization, how it can be beneficial for the human current life is one quite big information that we can get out of this, I guess, because our language or our word which attach or assign to the certain object can be treated similar way. As I said, in chimpanzee it cannot be the case, but for humans, term apple can be treated in a similar way to the actual apple. That means you can cut out the information from the environment and carry that information with you. And this is very important because you now have a way to think about the item which is not existing in your current environment. And that would definitely expand the range of the time and space that you can think about. I don't want to say animals don't have any idea about the future. They have probably think about the future to some extent, but the range is so different. And they can also process something that invisible. They can hold memory, and then they can think about what those others which is behind the screen can move to the another part. So they can estimate, they can predict, but the range is all limited in a very small range. And language or this way of processing or symbolization in human make for us to possible we think about like a far apart from the current environment. And even probably we don't experience as a real experience for the future or for the something in a part, far away from you, but at least you can think about it and you can phrase it. And then by phrasing it you can think even further. So that's kind of like it's ratchet way of the evolution. If you do this, then you can do that, and then that also make it possible for us to do further. So existence of this language or the how do we say that, symbolization or representation processing make it very much human unique in a sense, not only for the communication, but like how much we can think about future, how much you can think about like something that you cannot see.
That's perfect. I was gonna kind of end this part of the podcast by asking about the kind of the big questions left in comparative cognition, and I know that language and recursive thinking and these kind of things are really still
it's long lasting going.
But the research continues to be fascinating. But to just transition back before we start to close out the interview, to transition back to students coming into your lab, and this could be like in the past and then going forward with your future research, but what do they I mean, if you can answer this, that's great. I'm kind of curious. What do they get wrong about chimpanzees when they first arrive here? And maybe something they get wrong about how they think about doing their research and what will be possible and what will not be possible.
Well,
What did you get wrong?
I mean, for me, I have had not long, but enough experience as a non-human animal for the research as a researcher, because I got the PhD in Kyoto University, not with a chimp, but the other primate and pigeons work. And then moved to the States for my postdoc there and work on a rhesus monkey there. And to me, I kind of established how to approach the animals and how to scientifically analyze those data. And so it's two different stories, I guess. To me, the surprise and the big, not mistake, but like what I feel so different when I come to here is like chimps are curious about you.
Yeah.
That's capuchins, they are looking at you. They are trying to reach out to you for the food and so, but they observe me. Chimpanzees observe me. That was first shocking moment to me. Like, hey, this guy just looking to me for a long time, and then even like looks like thoughtful way of sitting. Like it's a I don't know. It's too much anthropomorphic, but they sit quietly and then put their hand on the chin and then gazing at you and then checking who the hell are you. I thought I had established enough for I don't want to do any anthropomorphic way of perception about animals other than my pets. I mean, my pets are different.
They get
they're
special pass.
But chimpanzee just makes me feel like this is something different that I have never seen I have seen before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Frans de Waal calls it anthropodenial.
True.
The other side of that. So
yeah.
I think you have that experience where maybe there's somewhere in between there.
I guess. But that's something I feel like so different and I mean weird as well, actually. But I mean, when it comes to the scientific work, of course, we just try to get rid of those too much anthropomorphic way of understanding. But that was first moment that I saw the chimpanzees. Wait a sec, these guys are just different. I don't want to say it's more human-like, but it just looks like they are thoughtful.
Yeah, sure.
And
I don't think it would be wrong to say closer. Well, at least we share more similarities with each other than you would with other species.
That is true. Or that probably means that their attitude can be more similarly interpreted in humans. I don't want to say which is more thoughtful among the species, but it's more easy for us to think about it that way. That's a probably way that we can phrase it.
Our flawed reality.
Yeah, exactly. But for the students or for the visitors that they come to the institute first and then see the chimpanzees, sometimes they are expecting that chimpanzees are friend to them. And of course, as a researchers, we want to bring a good environment for chimpanzees. I mean, partly because, as I said before, to better explore the cognitive abilities in the chimpanzees, they need to be in a natural setup as much as possible. That's one reason. But also, as a responsibility of the researchers, we keep them in a captivity. We have to think about how we can enrich their, life. So in both meaning, important to feel close to them, but we are not friend to them. If I were a friend to them, I don't want to keep them in a captivity. But again, we want to do that for our own scientific purpose. Then I want to put them a lot of effort to improve their life. But that's not because I want to be a friend of them, but partly because our research findings always try to, promoting the idea chimpanzees are so similar to humans. And that is very important for the first stage of the chimpanzee experiment, because on the time we had still big dichotomy, like human versus non-humans. And in a public level, I mean. So we want to emphasize the point that, we are continuum. in a life cycle. I mean, life evolution of life. So it's not only humans, other species can do it. That's a quite big important message for the public that, we human is not only one unique species, but we are connected to the other species. But that propaganda or that story makes people easy to believe that, we can understand each other more easily than the other species, and probably we can be a good friend. Or even TV programs sometimes talking about those chimpanzee subjects or participants here as a really personalized individual, which is true. I mean, they have a strong personality and characters, but if you emphasize too much about those things with a lot of like anecdotal story about the interesting event, then people can easily think they can be a friend.
Yeah.
So the problem that issue can cause is first distance between you and the students and participants. They easily try to come close physically. I mean, that is a problematic. Chimpanzee can be a risky animal.
Yeah.
As far as you keep the rules, it's totally fine. They know how to handle us. We know how to handle them, and nothing terrible happens. But if you immediately go over the border, they can be rage on it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a scary part. And second, mentally too close to them. It's coming to the point of the anthropomorphic understanding. But they have already big expectation. They should be able to do this or do that. And that sometimes go against or the problematic to think about the research question.
Right.
I don't want to say you have to doubt every single thing, but at least you need to make a critical thinking. Is this really possible? Is this the way to go? Is this like, so for the methodology, you have to do that. Also for the research topics, you have to apply the similar way of thinking.
Yeah.
And to make it sure you approach the proper question with a proper methodology. But if you have a too strong belief that they should be able to do one thing, that's, I guess, dim their eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's something you have to, or the students have to go through if they have that expectation.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, luckily these days, I don't think that's the case though. More public might feel that way, but like students, they do more, better understand what chimpanzees can be, and they also understand what the scientific approach means.
Yeah.
But like on a transition way, it happened.
Right. Yeah, the chimpanzees at PRI and just almost anywhere, it's such an iconic species,
right.
and people form their own ideas about what it should. And of course, there's a lot of people too. You mentioned if you want to be their friends, then you probably want what's best for them. That doesn't maybe include them being in small spaces. But the PRI or the eHub chimpanzees, we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, right.
Are in a good space, but they are also iconic within Japan, and I don't know if it's still true. They still receive birthday presents or something every year.
Not a lot.
Not a lot,
but
sure.
Like for the birthday of the certain chimpanzees, some of them are sending a lot of gifts, foods, basically.
Yeah. So they're kind of in the public eye, and they're these kind of public-facing figures. So with the reorganization of the Primate Research Institute and now the eHub Evolutionary Center for the Center for the Evolutionary Origins of Human Behavior, we know that the chimpanzees are staying put. So there may be some of the listeners will be interested to know about that. And can you tell us what maybe the plans are for your work for the lab, and what kinds of things you're going to be trying to do now?
Right.
You mentioned earlier a little bit that you're exploring a little bit more in this cross-modal correspondence and things like that.
And yes, we still have the chimpanzees here. The name is changed eHub, but we have them. And as far as we have them in the captivities, I would say we have to research them, because that's a responsibility for us to have animals in the captivities. So as far as they're here, we're gonna keep testing them, but meanwhile they have, as I said, it's also contributed public outreach activities, not directly, but
Yeah.
their findings on their behaviors and their cognition, broadly shared in the public, and they, in that sense, they contribute a lot for the public awareness of the science on the chimpanzees. So we also have a responsibility to keep them like in a good environment and enriched environment, I would say. So that's a responsibility part, and the research part, as far as they are here, we have to explore, because we don't want to keep them for nothing. But that doesn't mean we want to waste them.
Yeah.
So both directions, both sides. The one who, those species contribute a lot, so we have to take them in a good care. But meanwhile, we don't want to just keep them.
Yeah.
We just actually need to explore their cognitive abilities more.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, we don't running any reproduction program anymore. Means the current majority of the individuals around their 40s. And that means it's kind of human society, but we have more seniors in 10 years or so. Probably we have some individuals started passing away.
I see.
So that affect onto the research part in terms of the subject number.
Yeah.
So at some point we gradually closing down the chimp lab, not because this restructuring happens, but because simply their lifespan is not forever. It's basically we have some limitations. So
demographics.
That's a fact. But we still have some younger generation, which is around 22 years now, I guess. So if we could find a good international team to work on a chimpanzee cognition as multiple, places, then possibly we can still keep going. But only with the e-hub, I don't think we can keep running the chimpanzee experiment after probably 10 years or so, because the demographic issue, democracy is different. That's what we do in the Japanese government, but demographic issues that affect. But from the beginning, I guess general direction or movement in the primate cognition lab moving to the joint research, because even this age doesn't matter or doesn't affect some species. Always there is an issue of how many individuals you can keep in the lab. They cost a lot, and some institute doesn't want to keep them, or they cannot house enough number of the subject. In those situations, always bring the issue for number of subject in the primate cognition work is generally small. And replication and those things are also another issue, but to solve those issues together, I guess making good team across a different lab and applying the similar methodology to working together, that's solve the issue for the first number of subject, and also the replication issue as well. Because if multiple places working together with a similar topic with a similar methodology and get some not united but a similar result together, that is very strong. So for chimps, if we can find those partners, we want to do that direction as well.
Man, I hope, like everybody else on the planet, that we can start our international cooperations again. It's getting very frustrated. Okay, so just maybe this is a little bit of a left turn, and we'll close the interview right after this. But I just wanted to put you on the spot a little bit with something that I found. So I found, in addition to the various scientific papers you've put out with data using the chimpanzees here and other species that you've studied, I noticed, and this has the two reasons why I'm bringing this up. The first one is about target audience, who you're speaking to, and the second one is about language. So on your research map, which is the
you see the research map?
I
like the OCID.
Orchid,
yeah, that's better.
So the research map, which is a e-researcher database that we use here in Japan that lists up all of your accomplishments and papers and things. I found a couple of titles that you've written in Japanese language, which I found kind of interesting. There was the Tasha o omoi kokoro no shinka.
Oh yeah.
So that's something translated like the evolution of a caring heart or thoughtful mind. or something like that for others.
Right. It's kind of more like altruistic behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Altruistic behavior. And then the second one was, where is it here? Reichoruigakusha Uchu. And that translates roughly as primatologist meets the universe.
Yeah, right. You found them.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about what the target here is and what the focus was?
Well, the first one is quite simple. It's really reciprocity or altruism work. So in a context of the social cognition in primate, how much they can be altruistic is one big question for a long time. And we have done with my students on the time, I guess, maybe students, I guess, applying the touchscreen paradigm to get the better resolution of the behavior to explore how much they can be altruistic.
I see.
That's Japanese one is it's targeting the public audience and then just introducing our finding there.
I see.
Yeah. And basically like if you get enough number of trials, we see a gradual transition from the selfish behavior to the altruistic behavior.
Yeah.
So like at some point they want to do more.
Yeah.
They want to care about the others. But initially they want to prioritize their own. But if in a certain pressure, of course, slightly you have to adjust your behavior to the partner.
Yeah.
So that's transition you can see in the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first one. And second one is more interesting one, I guess. Yes, the primatology meets the universe. The universe is right, but it's like space science.
Right.
In the context of space science, because now in a space science, I don't know what exactly the English term for this unit in Kyoto University, but Kyoto University has one research unit which is promoting the scientific approach to how can I say, explore the issues related to the finding the habitable planet in universe. I don't know, in a
Sure.
universe.
Yeah.
So to do that, like there is many study going on, for example, and also terraforming is another issue. So if there is no natural planet which can be habitable, then how you can transform it or something like that, or what is a minimum requirement for the habitability. That's the issue. And most of the study is talking about like how we can grow the plant in no gravity, for example.
Yeah.
Or how we can filtering the water, or I don't know, it's like from the all different level, I guess, but like how to make water stay in the planet, not really, the steamed up, or like so many of those more physical and biological questions. Well, I don't know what is a even proper term.
Yeah, I mean like life support systems anyways.
Yeah, support system.
Yeah.
And when they think about what is a good supporting system for us to stay in the universe, they hit an idea. We have to understand human as a biological view from the biological viewpoint. And they hit on, hey, why not including some primatologists or the people who is working on primate, because evolution create a current format of the human beings, and that has also bring some restriction which environment you can stay, or what is important information for you. As I said, our perceptual system is basically a product of evolution to extract important information in the environment. Then if the environment changed, our perceptual system also can be changed. But how much it can be adjusted, how much we need to suffer from the difference in environment. So that's the reason why they want to include some cognitive scientists or comparative cognitive scientists to their team. And me and some more, actually from the Primate Research Institute on the time, joined the program. And there I wrote a document like why this unit or this area of research invite me to join. and where is the connection?
Yeah.
And connection is basically comparative cognitive science, always thinking about the interaction between environment and the cognitive abilities. Not the space or universe, but it's more like underwater, on a tree, on the ground, or in a social system. If you have a different environment, you are tuning your own cognitive abilities on a direction that you can survive better.
Yeah.
So this scheme can better, nicely fit to the idea how we can adjust to this space, or what environment is necessary for us to stay, not to stay comfortable, but stay okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, if you think about almost any, what you would call really good, solid science fiction space film or story, I think the elements related to social interaction, the, some might say, degradation of the human mind,
right
in space, or the psychological side of it, seems like such a huge.
Agreed. And the interesting is these days, not because of those space fiction things, but like a metaverse, for example.
Yeah.
That can be another thing connected to the same issue.
Yeah, interesting.
If you put the environment in a virtual way, what is the necessary information that you need to take that you can stay as human as we are?
Yeah.
Or what can be changed? Or is that change is preferred change or something that you don't like? So like if you think about like you are applying or you are embedding, or I don't know, you are located in a different environment, either virtual or space or some other environment, it's always good to think about what is a factor that tuning your mind and what makes you human. Or if something changed, you might not feel that you are human anymore. So that's a part ethical issue exists, but also more biological issue exists as well.
I think that's a good place to stop. And the next time we have another one of these, hopefully before 10 years, we might start with applying the metaverse to the chimpanzee cognition unit here at eHub. But until then, thanks, Dr. Ikuma Adachi, for joining me on the PrimateCast.
You've been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to all things primatology and wildlife science, to the conservation of species, and to the sharing of scientific knowledge. The podcast is hosted and produced by Andrew McIntosh, with artwork from Chris Martin and music from Andre Gonçalves. It is brought to you by the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology at Kyoto University's Center for the Evolutionary Origins of Human Behavior. Visit us online at theprimatecast.com and follow our social media feeds on Facebook and Twitter at The PrimateCast. Drop us a line anytime to say hello, to tell us what you think about the show, and to suggest future guests for the podcast.